A thick, wet fog rolled down from the mountains. It moved like a slow-motion wave, swallowing the green hills of Tenerife. At the bottom of the valley sat a small airport, Los Rodeos. The fog did not care that it was an airport. It simply consumed it. Visibility dropped from miles to meters in just a few minutes. The world outside the windows became a blank white wall. Inside the control tower, men squinted, trying to see the tarmac they were supposed to be managing. The lines and lights of their runway had simply vanished. It was a day when sight was a luxury no one could afford. Two giants were resting on the apron. Neither plane was scheduled to land at Los Rodeos. Their destination was Las Palmas Airport, nearby island of Gran Canaria, the region's main tourist hub. But history had other plans. A small bomb exploded in the Las Palmas terminal. Authorities closed the airport, fearing a second device. All incoming flights were rerouted. The closest option was small, ill-equipped Los Rodeos on Tenerife, a decision made out of caution to save lives. The diversion created a logistical cascade. In the world of aviation, communication is everything. It is a carefully choreographed dance of words, spoken in a specific sequence, to ensure that a pilot in the air and a controller on the ground share the exact same mental picture. On that day in Tenerife, the dance fell apart. The fog had taken away the pilots' eyes, forcing them to rely entirely on their radios. But the radio frequency was a crowded, chaotic channel. The controllers, under immense pressure, spoke with heavy Spanish accents. The pilots, Dutch, American, had their own distinct ways of speaking. The result was a soup of ambiguity. Instructions that should have been crystal clear became muddled. The Pan Am crew was instructed to taxi down the runway and exit at the third taxiway. In the fog, they couldn't see the small, unmarked turnoffs. His first officer radioed, "We are now at takeoff." The controller replied, "Okay." Pan Am transmitted, "We're still on the runway." The two transmissions overlapped. Captain Jacob Van Zanten was a titan in the world of aviation. He was KLM's celebrity pilot, his face beaming from magazine ads with the slogan, "From the man in the captain's seat." He had over 11,000 hours of flying experience. His authority in the cockpit was absolute. This was the era of the captain is king culture. What the captain decided, happened. His co-pilots and engineers were there to assist, not to challenge.
Is he not clear, that Pan American? What do you say? Oh yes.
This dynamic is now studied as a classic case of what psychologists call authority gradient. They had been trained by him. He was their superior in every sense of the word. To strongly challenge his decision would have been an extraordinary breach of protocol and respect.
When they heard, "We are now at takeoff," a chill went through their cockpit. Captain Grubbs calmly said, "Let's get the hell out of here."
The weight of command in his cockpit was to react to a danger they could now hear, but still could not see. The runway at Los Rodeos was designated 12/30. On that day, it was more than just a strip for takeoffs and landings. It had become a highway, you know. Because the main taxiway was blocked with parked aircraft, the tower had no choice but to direct planes to use the runway itself for taxiing. This is what the Pan Am 747 was doing. It had landed and was now slowly making its way down the active runway, looking for the C-4 exit that would take it to the parking apron. The fog was so thick that the Pan Am pilots passed the C-3 exit without being sure they had even seen it. At the far end of that same runway, the KLM 747 had just completed a 180-degree turn. This maneuver, called a back taxi, had taken them to the very end of the runway so they could use its full length for their departure. The entire system of safety had been reduced to a set of assumptions. The tower assumed Pan Am was clear. The KLM captain assumed the tower's OK was a takeoff clearance. As the KLM jet's 4 massive engines spooled up to takeoff power, they created a sound that ripped through the quiet fog. The plane began to move. 50 knots, 80 knots, 120 knots. They were like the eyes of a monster emerging from the mist. The bottom of the KLM 747, its main landing gear, and the belly of its fuselage slammed into the top of the Pan Am jet just behind the cockpit. The impact occurred at over 160 miles per hour. The sound was a deafening, metallic shriek of tearing metal, an unimaginable noise that was part explosion, part grinding. The KLM's engines shredded the top deck of the Pan Am plane, where many passengers were sitting. For those inside the Pan Am jet, their world was instantly transformed into a storm of flying debris, fire, and a crushing, irresistible force. The KLM aircraft, mortally wounded, remained airborne for a few more seconds. It staggered through the air for about 500 feet before it slammed back down onto the runway. Upon impact, the plane erupted. The 55,000 gallons of jet fuel turned the wreckage into a massive, roiling fireball, a concussive boom that momentarily cleared the fog around the crash site. The top of the plane was gone, but the main cabin below the wings was, for a moment, intact. A few dozen survivors found themselves in a surreal landscape of twisted metal. People jumped, breaking bones but escaping the flames. Others found holes in the side of the plane and climbed out. The control tower, still blind, knew something was terribly wrong. They saw a faint, hellish glow and sounded the alarm. But the first responders couldn't see anything. They drove slowly through the fog, searching for a fire they could hear but not locate. By the time they arrived, the KLM jet was an inferno, and the Pan Am jet was being consumed by spreading flames. In the immediate aftermath, there was only fire and smoke. The KLM 747, loaded with fuel for its return to Amsterdam, burned with an unimaginable ferocity. The fire was so hot that it completely consumed the aircraft, leaving almost nothing recognizable. All 248 people aboard, including the celebrated Captain Van Zanten, his crew, perished in the inferno. The roar of the explosion gave way to the hungry crackle of the fire. The initial impact had killed most people on the upper deck and in the center of the plane, but for a small group, survival was a possibility if they could escape. Captain Grubbs, his co-pilot, Robert Bragg, were among the few who made it out of the mangled cockpit. They jumped to the ground, injured but alive. In the main cabin, flight attendants heroically tried to open doors, but the damage and fire made it impossible. Survivors had to find their own way out, as secondary explosions rocked the wreckage. The rescue effort was hampered by the same fog. They did not realize for nearly 20 minutes that there was a second plane involved. This delay cost lives. Survivors were trying to get away, but emergency crews were concentrating their efforts hundreds of yards away. When the fog finally began to lift, the full scale of the devastation was revealed. The silence that followed the fire was heavy and profound. The investigation that followed was one of the most complex and scrutinized in aviation history. Investigators sifted the charred wreckage and recovered the cockpit voice recorders and the flight data recorders. They weren't looking for one cause, but for a chain of events, the tragic outcome of many linked failures. The CVR captured ambiguous radio calls, the non-standard, "We are at takeoff," the engineer's tentative correct question, "Is Pan Am clear?" and Captain Van Zanten's confident dismissal. Investigators concluded the primary cause. The KLM captain took off without a clear, unambiguous ATC clearance, amid confusing radio transmissions, a non-standard "OK," a masked warning, and dense fog. The disaster was a perfect storm of human error, procedural ambiguity, and unfortunate circumstance. The probe highlighted the dangers of a captain is king culture and a steep authority gradient. The Tenerife disaster was a wound on the soul of aviation, but from that wound came profound and lasting change. The vague, conversational style of radio communication was abolished. A new, standardized phraseology was developed and mandated worldwide. A pilot can no longer say "we are at takeoff." They must say "ready for departure." A controller cannot say OK, such as cleared for takeoff, and the pilot must read that instruction back verbatim for confirmation. The rigid hierarchy of the cockpit was dismantled. Crew Resource Management, CRM, shifted focus to the crew as a team, empowering challenge and open communication. Ground radar spread, markings and lighting improved. Active runway taxiing became tightly controlled. Every readback, every question to a captain, every precise instruction honors the legacy of Tenerife. The lesson is that the simplest words, spoken clearly, can be the difference between life and death.